Rocketman is directed by Dexter Fletcher and stars Taron Egerton, who portrays musical icon Elton John. Rocketman is a somewhat loose adaptation, and I'm putting a little bit of an emphasis on the word loose here, of the life of Elton John, where, when he was a little boy to his adult life, where he's on top of the world, but he struggles with alcohol and drug addiction. And even though this film was one of my most anticipated films of 2019, I was still a bit nervous because here's how I view musical biopics. They usually just want to tell a story and get from start to finish, usually with a certain formula filled with certain cliches that the majority of biopics follow, which was one of my criticisms of Bohemian Rhapsody recently. And of course, they get a really good actor who can maybe sing or can just do a really good job at lip syncing, voice footage from the real-life singer, and of course, the normal cliche showing highs and lows of fame, usually with a shit ton of drugs and alcohol and sex in a mix, or in the mix, and this can get tiresome, especially for somebody like me who sees a lot of movies on a weekly basis, and I wanted to give you guys a kind of frame of reference as far as what my anticipation was going into Rocketman. Now, before I get into my thoughts on the film, I did want to throw out my normal disclaimer for those of the uninitiated. The way that I convey my thoughts on a film is I do a pro and con list. This helps me best to compartmentalize all my thoughts, whether they're good or bad on the film, and while I try to keep the sections separate, if I can make a pro and a con work off of each other, or maybe if they're intrinsically tied to one another, then I'll do that. I have fun with it. Also, before I go on any further, don't hesitate to hit that subscribe button. It really helps out the channel. Yep, there's your disclaimer and your reminders to subscribe. Let's go ahead and get into my review of Rocketman. So I mentioned earlier my issues with musical biopics. While these normal occurrences are in this movie, the good actor who can sing, luckily they didn't go with the lip sync option, the highs and lows, drugs, alcohol, sex, and then some, that is about where the similarities between Rocketman and many of the other musical biopics like Bohemian Rhapsody stop, and that's because Dexter Fletcher decided to go in a different direction. This film is not a musical biopic, but rather a jukebox musical that happens to follow a similar formula to a musical biopic, which actually helps a lot of the cliche story beats to just kind of be pushed away for a bit. And really, like I said, this is more of a jukebox musical that just so happens to be using Elton John's music to help tell the story of his life. It's more along the lines of the same idea as Moulin Rouge and damn it, what was the other movie? I just forgot it again, fuck! Across the Universe, that movie with a bunch of Beatles songs that had What's-Her-Face from Westworld. But anyway, it follows along that same idea where it includes some very dreamlike and fantastical sequences, each one made more memorable and impressive with stunning choreography and some dazzling cinematography, instead of the film just going through him as a kid with family issues growing up and becoming a rock star and then getting into all the weird and bad habits and us just watching all of this turmoil, and then also him just going to his comeback at the very end. We are treated by characters just breaking out into song randomly during these highs and lows, and I say characters plural, not just Egerton himself. This is a true musical with dance numbers and montage sequences with many people singing to convey the passage of time and just simply the emotions of the room or Elton John himself. It really helps the film not feel too familiar or even too stale at times. It livens up the movie and adds more entertainment value. I love that they didn't shy away from anything in this film, and that's mostly thanks to Elton John himself. He He battled with many film studios over 2 decades, like almost, or maybe even a little more than 2 decades, but either way, I'm sticking with 2 decades. He fought with them for that long just to make sure that his vision for a film that portrayed his life, that went deep into the alcohol and the drugs and the sex addiction, could actually be achieved, helping to set up for some of the more heavy-hitting moments in the film. Hell, right around the time that the film started premiering on the festival circuit at places like Cannes, you know, it was reported that this was the first major film, or major studio film that actually showcased a gay male sex scene. And this really just shows how far we've come as a society, where just last year we had the first major film to have a main character who was homosexual, and now we're actually showcasing in a big movie a homosexual sex scene. It's amazing. There's also this non-linear narrative structure to the film, and it has a framing device that actually helps the film out. The main plot is juxtaposed with Elton John going to rehab, just talking to a therapy group, telling them his life story, and it really helps this concept that's filled with a shit ton of content about his life feel more clear and concise. I have to talk about Taron Egerton. I've loved this guy ever since I saw him in Kingsman. That was the first movie I saw him in. I thought he was really charming and clever. It was actually because of that movie that I thought that he could have actually been cast as Han Solo for the Solo film last year. Sadly, we didn't get that, but you know. Actually, no, I still would have preferred him as Solo. And then I saw him in Eddie the Eagle, which that one showed that he was not only a good actor, or even a great actor, but a more versatile actor, that he could pretty much play any role. This is easily his best performance since Eddie the Eagle, and if we get into Oscar season and his name is not going around the circuits as a potential shoo-in for a Best Actor Oscar, I'm gonna be pretty fucking confused. I was blown away by him in this role, and I knew that he was a good singer because I mentioned in my review of Illumination's Sing, which I said was basically like a ripoff of Zootopia in many ways. You know, I mentioned that he had singing talent, and also he did one of my favorite covers of an Elton John song in that movie. You know, I'm not at all really surprised that he was good at singing Elton John's songs, but he went even further with portraying him and singing Elton's songs. He didn't go so far as to try and sound like Elton John, but instead he put his own spin on it, and, you know, with his own voice, and it doesn't ruin the music at all. And I truly believed him as Elton John, even to the point where in many different angles, in many different iconic outfits that Elton John had worn throughout his career, he was the spitting image of the man, especially from the 70s and 80s. It was nuts. All of it was nuts. The performance, the singing, all of it. And speaking of the outfits, this film has the best costuming that I've seen for 2019 so far, and now I'm thinking back to my Aladdin video that I did last week where I said the exact same thing, but that I would say that would most likely only be in the top, maybe top 5 if it was lucky, but you know, whatever. I will say that without a doubt, the costuming in Rocketman is higher for me on the list than Aladdin is, and will definitely eclipse it for me. Each outfit for Elton feels like something that he would have worn at those times of his life, especially the ones that were made original for the movie, but also every single one of them that is actually based off of one of his real life performance outfits are all so stupidly accurate to how I remember them from old recordings of his concerts, music videos, and stills, picture stills. Whether it's his bedazzled baseball uniform from his performances at Dodger Stadium to his Queen of England dress. And you know who else is awesome in this movie? Jamie Bell. I love whenever he shows up in a movie. He's one of those lesser-known actors who can easily leave an impression on me. He plays Bernie Taupin in this film. Toppin was, and still is, Elton John's primary songwriting partner, and they brought that decades-long relationship to the screen in a beautiful way. I really loved how these two connected instantly, and I believed that they were friends, that they could still be friends after so long, even though, even through the more difficult and awkward times. And Bell's performance kind of functions as an empathetic surrogate, and I really like this. He felt like a stand-in for most audience members who are looking on at Elton's worst and best moments, except he has no judgment on him and only worries about his well-being, which is honestly how I felt. I felt like I was kind of watching the movie through his eyes in some aspects, and the soulfulness of his performance and his chemistry with Egerton led to some of the more emotional grounding in the film, and, you know, in this high-energy spectacle of a film. And also, it just adds more charm and heart to this film, which this film has a lot. You can feel the love that was poured into this material by Elton John himself, by Egerton, by Fletcher, pretty much everyone who worked on this film. Rocketman feels more like a passion project than the vast majority of modern musical biopics does, perhaps because they wanted you to leave the theater thinking about something, which is actually what my next pro is about. And you know what, I do have one more pro, but you know what, I'm actually going to leave it until closer to the end of this video, because I know it's going to be my longest pro, and also it kind of involves my biggest takeaway with the film and affected me very personally. But anyway, I'm not going to keep rambling about that. So with how the film is structured and told, it can be a tad bit difficult to pick out real flaws aside from pacing issues. There are definitely some scenes that drag, and also there are a few times where the acting from the supporting actors like Richard Madden and Bryce Dallas Howard goes a little bit too unrealistic, but I think that's mostly due to some bits of weak writing in their dialogue for some of these characters. And those are my thoughts on Rocketman. I really love this movie. It had a different story structure from other musical biopics that I really appreciated. Taron Egerton gave an Oscar-worthy performance, and the musical and musical numbers were just astounding overall. Please check out this movie if you haven't already. Now, I did say earlier that I wanted to talk about one last pro. So let's go ahead and get into my final point and, like I said, my last pro. So this may get into a tiny bit of spoiler territory, depending on what you think is a spoiler, so I do want to warn you real quick. And also, I can almost guarantee that this will take a while, and will definitely touch on who I am as a person. Anyway, there's your warning. Let's go ahead and get into it. Thinking back to Bohemian Rhapsody, there really wasn't much to really be taken away from it. No underlying message. It was just us getting insight into how one of the world's greatest rock bands became who they are, and it ended with an amazing recreation of the Live Aid performance. But aside from that, nothing really made you think or feel something deep. Rocketman did for me, specifically. Not specifically, I don't know why I said that, but anyway. So as I mentioned before in some of my videos, I don't like when characters in movies can be defined by one core trait, like this guy's a jock, this guy's a nerd, this guy's a homosexual, and so far, and so on and so forth, and basically, they are just that core trait about themselves. And a possible risk that this film could have actually gotten into was focusing too much on Elton John being a homosexual and potentially boxing him into that core aspect. But they treated him more like a human being who happens to be homosexual and also happens to be suffering through the alcohol addiction, drug addiction, sex addiction, and bulimia, though they never really touched on the bulimia part except saying that he was bulimic, but that's a separate thing. That's more of a nitpick on my part. Aside from the homosexuality, which is just another aspect of who he is as a person, everyone else, or everything else, is more of a result of something. Not just because it's part of him. The sex addiction, the drug addiction, whatever, is a part of him. it's all the result of something. Many would say it was because of his rough upbringing. His mother wasn't a great role model. She was a real bitch to him, and his father, sorry. His father was hardly around, and even when he wanted little to do with Elton John. And on top of that, because he never felt loved, he always went out of his way to anything or anyone that seemed to give him I can't speak today, sorry. He went out of his way towards anything and anyone who seemed to give him love, thus leading to his sex addiction. And everything else was just from a void that seemed like it could never be filled, especially since at different times he'd either subconsciously know or literally know that those he tried to love didn't actually love him back. And of course we get into the drinking and the drugs and all the stuffles. I don't know why I said stuffles. And after a while, Elton learns that he didn't need to worry anymore about not feeling loved, but rather needed to teach himself to love himself again, or even for the first time, and this part really spoke to me. I'm going to get a little bit personal with you guys. For the past few years, I've struggled with a number of issues. I've struggled specifically with self-esteem issues and depression issues, even to the point where I would actually stop doing this for extended periods of time. Hell, that's why I'm still doing a catch-up series every Wednesday, is because I missed a shit ton of movies last year, just because I had gotten into a point where I wasn't able to focus and have fun on this. I was just, it was at a point where I would just shut myself off from other people other than my wife, and even her at times. I would spend my time just mindlessly playing video games, maybe even not even enjoying them, but just basically to distract myself. I would smoke more constantly, which long before I started this channel, I was a chain smoker, and I stopped because I ended up hurting myself. I had gotten wisdom teeth surgery, and I got a dry socket because I needed that fix. I needed another cigarette, and that made me stop smoking for a while. And also tied to, those moments where I would just be depressed for an extended period. I would also gorge myself. I'd have an eating problem, but not enough to where I'd consider it an eating disorder, but I would constantly eat just to fill this void that I had. And there were a couple of causes for those things, but that's something that I will talk about maybe in a later video in a much, much, much later date. But my point is, even though I've gotten to the point where, even though I've never gotten to the point where I had even basic levels of alcohol or drug addiction, luckily I've never gotten to that point, I've always felt like my issues were just me, that I could barely tolerate myself. I still have those days, but I've been making efforts to get better, especially over the past year. I've been putting more effort into my day job. I've started working out more constantly, exercising. I've been pushing myself to do more with this channel, getting more of a consistent schedule for me in this office space. And all of it is a very difficult, but in my opinion, worthwhile exercise in bettering myself and reminding myself that I just need to love myself before I can truly, focus my love on everyone else. And if you know anything about me, or if you know me personally in my life, if you know me outside of this office, outside of these videos, you know that I'm a really nice guy, or at least a lot of people tell me. I honestly don't think I'm a good person most of the time, but a lot of people would look at me and say, I'm a nice person. So, at that point, you can also say that I would rarely take time to focus on myself. I love helping others, but I would rarely give myself a chance to actually focus on myself, because I need to focus more on myself so that I can better help others. And so when I'm not exercising or focusing on my day job, I try to come back down here and work on videos and show notes for any movies that I watch. And all of this is a sort of therapy to me, and it's great therapy for me as long as I can remind myself to be consistent about it and also to look at myself in a positive light. But anyway, I'm rambling about myself again. My point is, Rocketman puts plentiful emphasis on the idea of loving who you are deep down and not letting your past define you or get you down. And the scene where Elton John finally figures this out, that he just needed to not focus so much on the fact that he didn't feel loved growing up or even throughout most of his career. He needed to remind himself that he needed to love himself before he could truly get better. I was trying to keep the tears from streaming down my face because I related wholeheartedly, and even though it's still a daily struggle for me, this is my passion. This is what I want to do with my life, so I am continuing to fight my own personal demons to make sure that I can be the best that I can be for you guys. And this movie, this life story about this amazing man, just reminds me that it is actually possible to overcome these issues that I have and become a stronger person for myself, but most importantly for my wife, my friends, and all of you guys. Thank you so much for all of your continued support and your future support for everybody who have not seen any of my videos up to this point and have not subscribed. If you enjoyed the video, please don't hesitate to hit that like button, and if you're new here, once again, hit that subscribe button so that you can keep up to date with everything that's going on the channel, and to better help me in the channel, and to just continue and support us. And also, don't forget to keep the conversation going on down below in the comments section. I really love hearing what you guys think about the movies and the topics that I bring up on this channel. Farewell until the next video, all you casual movie fans, or casual moviegoers and movie fans alike. That seems to be the one that I always fuck up on the most. Farewell until the next video, all of you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike. Yes, I did that right. And keep on being awesome.